Hello everyone and welcome to Basi's IAS. Let's take up today's news analysis, that is 4th December 2019. Let's get into our first article of discussion. Our first article of discussion is with regards to Indian economy or revenues to the government. The article states that GST revenues not enough for states. States compensation will not be enough if only GST revenues are there. This is said by the center. Letter to states flags falling collections. From this graphical representation, you can understand very clearly about what's been talked about. It says that GST collections went down in September, very low, but again it has picked up or it has recovered in the following months. Okay, so whatever in the blue, the bars, this shows gross GST collections in crores, and this scale shows growth in percentage. So we can understand that in September it was very low, October started increasing, and November it is more. So GST collections were following this kind of graph. That means it is not uniform. Not uniform collections or not continuously increasing. Is it continuously increasing? No, not continuously increasing. So there is a fluctuating trend in the collection of GST. Now let us understand why in news. Why this is in news? Because Center has written to all states voicing concern that due to lower GST collections, compensation might not be enough to pay for losses arising out of the tax system. This is done by the center because states like Rajasthan, Kerala, West Bengal, Delhi and Punjab have publicly urged the center to transfer pending compensation payments as they have not receiving the dues from several months. When they ask for pending dues, center is saying that it is not, whatever they have collected is not enough, so that they are not able to share the pending dues. But states is of the view that they may take the matter to Supreme Court if the center does not release the dues. This issue will be discussed in detail at the next GST Council meeting that is scheduled for next fortnight of December. So among other issues, GST revenue position shall be discussed in detail at this meeting. This was center's information to the states. So basically, what is the takeaway for us from this article? States have asked center to share their dues regarding GST. That time center have informed that whatever GST revenue center have collected, it is not enough for the center to give it to states. Now our next question is why states are asking to center. Because when GST was implemented, it was a promise given that compensation to the states for losses arising out of GST implementation that convinced a large number of reluctant states to sign on to the new indirect tax regime. So the center has promised compensation for any shortfall in tax revenue due to GST implementation for a period of 5 years. Now let's get into our second article of the discussion, that is regarding Citizenship Amendment Bill or CAB 2019. The article points out that Citizenship Bill likely next week. BJP cracks whip. Rajnath Singh asks MPs to ensure that their presence in Parliament is there. So before getting into this article in detail, we'll try to understand what is the Citizenship Amendment Bill and why it is so controversial in the country. This is outrightly a sectarian bill which will change the definition of illegal migrants. So this will affect how illegal migrants are seen in India if the bill is passed, because the government seeks to amend it in order to facilitate the grant of Indian citizenship to non-Muslim immigrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan who are of Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Parsi, Buddhist and Christian extraction and who had migrated to India without valid travel documents or the validity period of whose documents had expired during their stay in India. So this bill will entirely change the lookout for illegal migrants in India, because after this bill is passed, citizens of India designation will be given to people who are non-Muslims from the countries of Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh. That means they should belong to, or the immigrants have to be from these countries who are either Hindus, Christians, Parsis, Buddhist or Jain. And even though they come with an invalid travel documents, they will be given citizenship. These people were compelled to seek refugees in India owing to religious persecution or fear of religious persecution in their countries of origin. So that is been the explanation given. The bill has no provisions for Muslim sects such as Shia or Ahmadiyya whose members face persecution in Pakistan. Let's get into our next article of discussion. This article is regarding transgender rights, or we can say that setting the clock back on intersex human rights. Transgender persons bill does not distinguish between transgenders and intersex persons. So in this particular discussion, before we getting into the nitty-gritties of the article, we'll first try to understand what is the difference between transgender and intersex person. Transgender is a person when he or she is born as a specific gender. Suppose if X is the gender, and after few years in the development of his childhood or adulthood, he realized that his willingness or the body and the mental conviction is related to a gender Y. So they want to shift from gender X to gender Y. This is called transgender designation. While in intersex, by birth only, their biological conviction is not there. That means the biological organ which is seen during the birth time is not clear if it is the gender X or gender Y. So this is the basic difference between transgender and the intersex. Basically, what in day-to-day our transactions, these two terms are often confusing. When a person who is transgender has a gender that is different from one traditionally associated with the sex they are assigned at birth, a person who is intersex are born with a variation in their sexual or reproductive anatomy such that their body does not fit typically definitions of male or female. That means transgender, they are already clear. When they are born, they belong to this sex, but intersex, when they are born itself, biologically itself, it is not clear that in which sex, that is sex X or sex Y, they belong to. Now we'll come back to our discussion thinking why in news. Okay, this is in news because Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill 2019 has continued to trigger protest across the country. Without addressing the concerns of LGBTQ community and considering any amendment to the draft bill, Rajya Sabha has passed the same version of the draft bill that was passed by Lok Sabha. Basically, the journey of intersex human rights starts in this year, that is April 2019, with a historic judgment from Madras High Court saying that in the case Arun Kumar versus Inspector General of Registration. This judgment marks the beginning of a normative journey of intersex human rights in India. The court took up the issue of validity of consent given on behalf of intersex infants for undergoing sex-selective surgeries. So as we have discussed before, what are intersex? Intersex means by birth only, they have some confusion about which sex they belong to, sex X or sex Y, they are not sure. So for that, if some surgery is done undergoing sex selective surgeries, it can be corrected. So that was banned or that was stopped by Madras High Court in this respective case, that is Arun Kumar versus Inspector General of Registration. It held that the consent of the parent cannot be considered as the consent of the child. Okay, hence such surgery should be prohibited. This is a momentous judgment as it recognizes the consent rights of intersex children and right to bodily integrity. Judgment declared a prohibition on sex selective surgeries on intersex children in Tamil Nadu. Complying with the directions of the court, Tamil Nadu banned sex reassignment surgeries on intersex infants and children. So that is the final thing. Tamil Nadu has banned this sex reassignment surgeries. This is the final output of this verdict. As the transgender bill also deals with issues relating to human rights protection of intersex persons, it needs to be examined in light of the developments of intersex human rights. Actually, there arises a controversy in the name of the bill itself. The bill only says that transgender persons bill. So where is intersex persons rights included is the question, because transgenders have a different gender identity than what was assigned to them at birth, while intersex indicates diversity of gender based upon biological characteristics at birth. So there are also multiple variations in intersex itself. The bill is not in alignment with the evolving international human rights framework. Parliament will be well advised to consider changing the title of bill to Gender Identity, Gender Expression and Sex Characteristics Protection of Rights Bill 2019. Therefore, the need of this controversy, the need of this community is that there have to be a clear definition highlighting the distinction between transgender persons and intersex persons. This will enable them to exercise the rights which they are entitled to. Okay, some persons born or living with intersex traits can live with a non-binary identity or may choose to live as gender fluid persons. The bill fails to account for these possibilities. Neither does it provide for the definition of terms such as gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. Basically, the bill doesn't say much about discriminating against intersex persons is a clue, because intersex conditions are termed as derogatory terms even by medical professionals. To address this, the bill should have included a provision directing medical professionals to ensure that intersex traits are not characterized as disorders of self-development or sex development. Intersex traits should not be considered as genetic defects or disorders, and terms like gender dysphoria should be used to characterize them. The need is a little difficult. We have to see how the government is taking ahead with this. So basically the current situation is that transgender bill is in parliament. It is in the verge of getting passed by the two houses, but the bill only talk about transgender persons and does not have anything about intersex is the main controversy. And also people need to change the name of the bill from transgender persons bill to gender identity, gender expression and sex characteristics protection of rights bill 2019. Let's get into our next article of the day. This article is precisely regarding Indian economy, that is regarding economic slowdown. Article points out that structural policies needed for 7+% growth. Slowdown is outcome of supply side constraints, says the economist. So let's get into this article. It's an interview mode article, and a person interviewed Ratin Roy, Director of National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and he was also a former member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So he discusses the causes of economy's troubles and suggests possible remedies. And this article goes like an interview. So we'll go ahead and see what's been talked about and what are the suggestions for our economy to gain the growth. Suddenly, this again in news because of official GDP growth estimate for the July-September quarter is only 4.5%. Actually, we've aimed at an 8% growth. Now it is recorded that almost half, 4.5%. It is lowest in 6 years, or we can say 26 quarters. The discussion starts with a point regarding Finance Minister said last week that economy is not in recession. But the discussion starts by saying that definitely close to being in recession, but for different reasons. Measuring recession in terms of negative growth in 2 quarters is a developed country's concept. It applies when economies are in steady state and recession is departure from the steady state. A state of fully tapped land and capital so that growth is possible in case of improvements in technology and productivity, as happens in developed economies. In our countries like India, which is a developing economy, growth is possible by increasing use of resources. So in order to recover from this bad growth rate of 4.5, the article suggests that we need to understand that we are not a command or control economy. We need to accept this recession is structural in nature. Therefore, getting the growth rates consistently up to 7+% will require structural actions, because recession is structural in nature. If these actions are taken, short-term actions can be thought of to keep the growth rate above 5% over a 2-year window, which is the maximum you can afford to keep such short-term actions in place, because they are a bit like steroids. The article also points out a clear difference between short-term actions and structural actions. They said that RBI can quickly increase the amount of cash in economy. Then banks, especially PSBs or public sector banks, can use that together with interest rate policy to provide easy credit. A large supply of credit should lead to cheaper credits. This will have to be supported by a reduction of administrative price of credit, which is RBI's repo rate. So there could be hurdles to credit off-take due to fiduciary or prudential reasons, so that need to be tackled. Same for mismatched expectations. If the temporary measures for boosting aggregate demand, both consumption demand and investment demand, are the only assures taken, structural measures get neglected and the threat of inflation is real. Inevitable result of that can be stagflation. Basically, the article tried to point out that we have a supply constraint now. Okay, supply side constraint. Since we have a supply side constraint, the main thing RBI can do is that RBI can increase the cash supply or money supply in the economy. So when RBI can increase the money supply, public sector banks can decrease the interest rate. By RBI can also help this one by reducing the repo rate. So when RBI reduce the repo rate, PSBs will be getting the cash in a very less rate, and they can distribute this to people, and thereby there will be cheaper credit, and thereby investment will be more and supply will be decreased. When supply is more, obviously growth will be picked up in the economy is what the analysis says. So the article summarizes by saying that current slowdown is on account of supply side constraints and not demand side constraints. And if you produce things that Indians earning minimum wages can afford, aggregate demand will increase. So we'll again, final touch, we'll have a look at what is solution being told. Solution said that RBI has the main role. RBI can increase the money supply in the economy. But another thing is that if RBI increases money supply, inflation will be a side effect. We have to have inflation controlling measures in one side. At the same time, money supply will increase. So public sector banks have to decrease their interest rate so that people get more loans or more access to credit. And this will become cheaper credit because of the decrease in the interest rate. At the same time, RBI can also play with repo rate. If they give repo rate at a very less rate to banks or public sector banks or commercial banks, they can lend to people in a very cheap rate. So both will contribute to the factor of cheap credit. Of course, if there is cheap credit available in the economy, there will be more investment, there will be more growth, and more supply, demand and supply will increase. Therefore, we can aim at a 7% growth is what been discussed in this article. That's all for today. Hope this helps. Thank you.